Thanks for joining us. Here's Miranda.
Yes, he's doing this because he was eating up all of our time just sitting here. I don't know what I'm going to say next. I don't know what I'm going to say next.
Then I figured it out.
Yeah. So I gave him a hard
Miranda.
time about having all day to come up with something to say. So he's like, "All right, we're ready." So here I am doing the intro, and now I'm done.
And now
We're
you're
passing
done.
it off to Brett.
We had an interesting visitor today. Some little kids came selling candy. I haven't seen that in forever. Like, back in the day, you had the candy bars, and they were selling candy bars and stuff.
It's true. And the oldest kid couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. And then maybe a 5-year-old. And the little one toddling along was barely a year and a half, maybe. So
yeah,
that was interesting.
Made me fearful because I didn't see an adult anywhere. That made me like, I'm getting so old. Back in my day, that would have been nothing, They were like, here's a box, go sell candy. Wander around all kind. We did.
Yes. And you'd have been 7 all on your own.
Walk to the next city, I'd have been selling candy, and call them across state lines. Well, I need another box of candy. But here, nowadays, you want to be really careful. And so, yeah. And I am just sharing around, because we didn't do the countdown, so I have to share it to our feed and our story and to our page. And that's why we talk about nothing until we get going.
Yeah. And, this week we're talking, last week we talked about Lot and self-reliance. And this week we'll be talking about Abraham and self-reliance. And, it's really hard when you lose some of your self-reliance. Honestly, ever since Brett and I had COVID back in April, it has been one thing after the next, it seems like, and always something coming along. What did I do once? I got up off my bed and I got one foot stuck in the opposite pajama pant thing.
Oh, right.
And next thing you know, I was on the floor. Thunked down on my knee, hitting the wood floor. I banged my head into the dresser, ended up with a big lump on my head, and all things really turned out fairly well, but still took it easy for at least a week. And what was that? Somebody then. It's like this constant cycle of you barely get over something and something else happens. But a friend of ours that we had known in Nebraska, she dropped by to see us, and when she said goodbye, she hugged me. And it squeezed my chest. It just kinked up this little spot in my chest. Oh, that hurt for weeks, really hurt for weeks. And so I had to keep asking Brett to do various things for me. And it really annoys me because, we're used to being self-reliant and doing things for ourselves. And then was it yesterday? Yesterday, Asper and I went shopping.
Was that yesterday? No, it was 2 days ago, wasn't it?
No, we went on Friday.
Did you?
No, we went on
Thursday.
Thursday. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
we went on Thursday.
The knock on the head from
No, that was months ago. But anyways, yeah, yesterday, day before yesterday, we were going shopping, and so I get the coolers out of the garage, so the automatic garage door opener quit working, and in the meantime, we're just you push on the front of it, and get it going up. Mm-hmm. But Brett makes it look easy. I've done it a time or two, but
it's not really easy, but yeah.
I am shorter and
it's a heavy door too.
Yeah. So, anyways, I'd done it before and I was fine. But Thursday I did it and it was not fine. I tweaked up my back. It hurt to breathe, and it hurt to breathe. So, but I was still gonna go grocery shopping because that was the plan. And I thought it was going to hurt for weeks, seriously. But by some good fortune, it just up and disappeared halfway through the day or partway through our shopping experience. I was so very thankful. But I had spent a little bit of time before that, waiting on Brett and such to get ready to go. And it's emotionally painful to lose your self-reliance. I was very frustrated that now I was going to have to ask Brett to wash the dishes. And it's not as though he doesn't wash the dishes on occasion, but it's hard to lose your self-reliance and do things for yourself. And so we're talking about Abraham today, and also to help illustrate, we are talking about the rich young ruler.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
And that's what I have to say about that. Yes.
Oh, yes.
So, last week we talked about Lot being self-reliant. And this week we're going to, I'm just going by what she said. No, I didn't read the top part. I only got, and this week we'll be looking at Abraham being self-reliant. But first, we're going to start with the rich young ruler, and that's going to help illustrate our point.
Yes.
This is what she wrote. I'm just saying it.
It is, but you have to tell us a little bit about the story about the rich young ruler. I didn't write that out. You can't just read this. These are just
that's just the thoughts. Yeah. Okay, the headlines. So, what do you want to know about the rich young ruler? The whole thing, or just
few points?
A few points. So, I'm sure you're familiar with the story of the rich young ruler who came to Jesus and, Master, tell me what I need to do to be saved. And he says, well, honor your father and mother, keep the Sabbath holy, brush your teeth every day. And so he's like, I've done these since my youth. And then Jesus said, and it's interesting, the passage says he looked on the youth and had compassion on him, which was really cool. And so then he said, well, go and sell all that you have, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. And then that really hit the rich young ruler hard. And he struggled, and he walked. The Bible says, and then he turned away sadly because he was of great possessions, and that's where Jesus said, it's easier for a poor man, or it's harder for a rich man to get in heaven than for the camel to go through the eye of the needle, which is not what you think of, an actual sewing needle eye. That was the name of a gate where camels had to kneel down so they could crawl through the entrance. He wasn't being like a camel through the eye of a needle. It was an actual gate called that. That was very difficult for camels to get through. Not impossible, but difficult. And so that's, kind of the rich young ruler. Which, in the backstory you should know is that, being youthful and from a rich family, he would have had, great possession in society. He would have been looked at as blessed by God, because the prevailing attitude was that if you had possessions, then God smiled upon you and liked you and blessed you with possessions. And if you were poor and in the street, you'd obviously done something wrong for God to, curse you or withhold blessings. So the wealthier you were, the more loved by God you were. And so he would have been seen like that. He would also have been steeped in the Pharisees' teaching, being not just wealthy, but also some house that had some sort of leadership, rulership. They would have been privileged to be able to have one of the, elite, renowned Pharisees, who would have been seen as, wise and, highly sought after teacher. They would have been able to get them to tutor their son one-on-one, because that's also a privilege that comes with wealth and power. You then get to instead of going to the public school, you get one-on-one from the elite professor, and which is kind of what probably led him to Jesus. He'd been doing all this and received this amazing instruction and all the stuff the Pharisees, and yet he was in tune enough to know and felt that this didn't do it. There was still something missing, which is why he went to Jesus.
Right, and so being steeped in the Pharisaical type culture, and also just basically based on what he said, he said, well, I've kept all those commands since I was a small child. Mm-hmm. So he was a part of the belief system of doing good in order to be good, basically.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the Ten Commandments. It would have been all the Pharisaical laws, and it would have been the righteousness by works. I'm doing all this to be loved by God, to be accepted, to be, I'm keeping all the law, and that makes me, amazing because, yeah.
Right, and so if he would have sold all of his stuff and given it to the poor and gone and followed Jesus, he was giving up his self-reliance, right? So giving up our self-reliance, like I said earlier, is a hard thing to do. It's a very much a part of who we are, and until we lose some of our self-reliance, we don't realize how tightly bound we are to doing stuff for ourselves, and how hard it is to ask someone to do something for us.
He would also been giving up his definition of salvation.
That's true.
Because he would have been rejecting, to follow Jesus, he knew would be choosing the other side. If you want to get an idea of what that might feel like, imagine, sort of going from one religion to another, like going from Baptist to Adventist or something, you're going from Adventist to Baptist. It would be a little more like going from Catholicism to, Protestant, or going from Protestant, like Adventism, to Islam. It would have been a huge rejection of one and acceptance of the other, because Jesus, he would have known, was not liked by the Pharisees, and he was the opposite of the Pharisees, and so it would have been losing his identity, his everything that said who he was, but also everything he was brought up to believe. He would have been letting all that go.
Right, and so we are to live out the words of Jesus, right? Well, clearly the rich young ruler did not live out the words of Jesus. And his belief system of doing good, to be good, stayed firmly in place. And he did not see a different way of living. Basically, he needed his stuff in order to be him. It affirmed who he was in all sorts of ways, not just, oh, I need my stuff, but it was a religious affirming of his relationship with God.
It was his whole being.
Yeah.
His possessions, his status, and his spiritual well-being. It was all that. In fact, if you didn't know, this is the only person who ever turned Jesus down as far as being a disciple, because this is what Jesus was asking him to do. Peter and all the other disciples, he was like, put things down, come follow me. And so this is what Jesus was saying to this guy. We would have had 13 disciples, and this is the only one that said no.
Yeah. So he chose to be self-reliant rather than God-reliant. And so now we're going to contrast this story with Abraham.
Well, before you leave it, one thing that would have been interesting that probably can apply to us too is it would have been scary, not just switching religions as it were, but the Pharisaic way of life would have been far safer, even though it was, pretty strenuous and all these rules to follow and all these things you had to do and not do and da-da-da. That would have felt safer to him than come follow me, because that was the great unknown.
Yes. He, come follow me, and then that's it. Like, it's like jumping off a cliff, basically. You have not a clue what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
And so, we can see the whole story when we read through the Bible, and we're like, well, how could they be so dumb and all this such? But, we too hold far more tightly to Pharisaical type belief system than we would ever want to admit. And, yeah.
It was a much bigger leap of faith than we usually give it credit for. It would have been a huge leap of faith.
Yeah. So now Abraham, he certainly had his moments there of self-reliance.
A few,
yes, right. And the times he called Sarah his sister instead of his wife, and when he chose to have a son with the maid rather than waiting on God, even though he'd already waited on God a long time, but all the same. So times of self-reliance in his life. And, he kind of had gotten to the point, I think, where he recognized that really hadn't turned out so well for him.
It took him a few times.
It took him many times. Yes. And there's also, those are the bigger things. We don't know all the little daily things that he learned to rely on God.
Right.
Or not as well, And so when he finally gets to this point in time in life, when God asks him to sacrifice his son Isaac, he says yes. It could not have been easy, but he did say yes. And so Abraham chose to obey and live out the words of God to him. He didn't understand it. He couldn't see into the future of what God was going to do, but he did choose to be God reliant rather than self-reliant. And it was when he obeyed that now he understood. It's obey and then understand. So, the obeying came first, and then the understanding came. So Abraham, too, he could have chosen to keep Isaac and be self-reliant. After all, Isaac represented his relationship with God. It represented the promises of God to him, and Isaac was a fulfillment of that. And so to give that up probably fell along in the same lines as the rich young ruler giving up his blessings from God, his affirmation that he was a fine, okay, and good person, basically, you know.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, that would have been, for Abraham, it would have been, now after all those years, and he's really, he and Sarah are really, really old, and there's no way they're ever having any, that would have been a huge leap of faith for him as well, to sacrifice Isaac, because now, that's the end then. It's over. And so he had to reach back to all the times he thought, well, I need to do this because God needs my help, or I have to take care of this, otherwise it won't happen. He had to let that go in that moment and say, I don't know how God is going to do this, but I trust that he is now, because all the times I didn't trust that he would, things just didn't go well. So I'm going to trust now, and that's when the ram was provided. So yeah, the obey and then the path opened.
Right, and so after God provides the ram as a sacrifice, Abraham names the mountain Moriah, which means God provides. The rich young ruler, on the other hand, would have named his mountain I provide, if you want to just make a comparison, an analogy.
Well, yeah, but you said Moriah means God provides.
Yeah.
So how do you say I provide?
Well, I don't know. I didn't.
You didn't look it up? Why didn't you look it up? That would have been Iriah. So it's either Moriah or Ariah.
There you go.
Ira. Mount Ira. I don't know.
Okay.
I just made that up. It's not a real language.
So who is Abraham without his stuff? So, the simple answer is God reliant, of course, and the place where God provides. And God does provide, and he also provides us with opportunities to give up our own self-reliance, right? And they generally are not pleasant experiences. We don't want to give up our self-reliance. It becomes an emotionally painful place for us. Basically, we're self-reliant. The things we do, it protects us. Our self-reliance protects us, and it keeps us safe, keeps us taking care of ourselves. And that seems like a very safe place to us. And yet, so when God comes along, it's not like, and he provides us these opportunities of God reliance rather than self-reliance. Occasionally we compare things to pulling the Band-Aid off, right? And sometimes I think it's actually, when God does that, it's more like he's just pulling back the skin, and it's raw, and it's open, and it's painful, emotionally painful. And we want to take care of it right away. And so we become self-reliant, and we go and do whatever it is that we do that takes the pain away, and we don't have to think about it. We hide it, basically, by covering it up with our Band-Aids. Like, for myself, I might go work a little bit harder, get some more stuff done, or anything like that. Some people may not be able to work during times like that. They may just zone out and not get anything done because they feel unable to function at that point in time. It's a way of self-soothing and...
We're talking about coping.
Coping mechanisms.
Yeah, so people can turn to all different things to cover the pain.
Right, and it's self-reliance rather than relying on God, and knowing that despite this at the moment, all things do work together for good for those who love God. We know that. We don't always choose to accept that and live it out in our hearts.
Yeah, and really, you're talking about sort of sort of the cycle of addiction. You're talking about, behind addiction is any addiction. Usually there is some sort of pain or trauma or something we're trying to cover up, not confront, whatever. And so people, we're people, our natural thing is to avoid pain, be it physical or emotional or spiritual. And so we do things to either, not confront the pain or to hide the pain, cover the pain, medicate the pain. So that's, drinking and drugs and working or not working. I mean, it's something, and one of the morality lessons in recovery is all life lessons will be repeated until learned, meaning you'll always come back around to the pain until you deal with it. The medication may get stronger, longer, harder, deeper, whatever, but you'll always need more over time to avoid the pain, as opposed to going through the difficult process of dealing with the pain. But that's always better than trying to cover it up.
Right, because this is one of those things where it would make no sense to not be self-reliant at that moment to us. It makes no sense at all. And yet if we were to take that moment and just tell God, yes, this hurts, but I do know that all things work together for good for those who love God. And so I am here and I'm going to let you protect me rather than protecting myself. Now, and then, continue to live out his words of obedience to him. And then we may very well be just as surprised as Abraham was, for example, what God does for us. Because first of all, we obey, and then we understand as God draws near to us. And we can see things that we had no idea were going to be there for us. And so Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is a verse that is all about God reliance and not self-reliance. It's trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Okay, so when we walk in God's paths of righteousness, his words lived out become the path, right? So this is like Abraham. He obeys. He's living out the words of God. He obeys them. And then he understands. That creates more of the path as he walks down it. More of it than more that he can see at that point in time that he wasn't able to see before. So we may not be able to see where we're going when we obey his words, but when we live them out, but it creates a path, and then we can see. The end.
The end. Or another way to say that is the only part of the future you need to know is what is the next right thing to do.
That's right.
And as you take that step, the next step becomes clear. Then you take that step, the next step becomes clear. And sometimes God has it all laid out for you. Sometimes it's like, oh, here's a plan. Here's a way to go that's going to go for the next 6 months or whatever, or possibly the next 4 years you're going to college. And sometimes it's for the next hour. And that's all you can see. And it goes back and forth. But when you go back to that verse, trust in the Lord with all your heart, it doesn't matter if it's the next minute or the next year. You're really in the same place.
Right, because when you're in that place of where you want to trust in your own reliance, you can tell yourself God's promises to you that he will be the one who takes care of you. But the only thing you can do is live that out in the next step. And you can only see that for maybe the next minute. Know God says he's going to show up and take care of you. And that's all you can hold on to at the moment.
Yep, and sometimes that's what Abraham had, and a lot of guys. I mean, Job for sure, that was what he had, and you're talking about somebody who had lots of wealth and lots of everything, and it was all stripped away, and then who was he without his stuff? He was still, the one who said, I will rely on God, whether he saves me or not. And he's a good example of what you're talking about, too.
Right, yeah.
So there you go. All right, well, thanks for joining us, and we should say hi to our own Mariah.
Mariah, yes, hello.
We know a Mariah.
Jay and Diane's daughter.
Yep, So you said Mariah. I didn't think of it till just now. It's
Yes.
like, wait, we know her Mariah.
Yes, well, it's unlikely Mariah's watching, but Jay and Diane, if you're watching, hello.
Tell the Mariah we
Yes, yeah, tell Mariah we said hello.
and used her name in our thing. Yeah. All right. So thanks for joining us. And next week, I have no idea.
Yeah, I think next week we might talk about what we were going to talk about this week until I changed my mind and we talked about this instead.
Well, there you go. All right. Have a great rest of your Sabbath, and hope you have an awesome week. We'll see you next time.